If you've looked at your banquet program, it does look like it's sort of somewhat of a tribute to the Scouts. It didn't start out like that, and that wasn't the plan. It just sort of happened. I guess it didn't hurt that the reunion chairman was a Scout. And the guest speaker that was kind enough to say he would come and visit with us for a while happened to be a Scout pilot. And it just all sort of coalesced that John Jenks had been quoted about the Scouts, and as he says in the bottom of his quote there that was published in a Hawk magazine article, "My Scouts are my reason for existence." And I'm not sure whether he knew at the time how prophetic he was in that statement, because for those of you that don't know, today A Troop, 3rd of the 17th, is all Scouts. That's all there is. And that's what John Jenks, I think, was telling us about at the time. And little did he know, apparently the Army was going to listen to him.
First time, yeah.
And Spur 6 would like to say a few words to us at this point.
I look around this room, I see a bunch of Scouts. Yes, we got snake drivers. Yes, we got awesome slick drivers. And we got a bunch of pretty ladies. But the comment is correct, and I hold it to be true. The Scouts are the very basic reason we were in business, and everything else was there to support their activities, including me. And I was only in a support activity. I never considered myself as a commander. I still don't today. Yeah, I had to make some tough decisions. That's what commanders do. But I always considered myself a scout, because that's the business Air Cav is in.
Sir, I did not steal this thing. I want you to know that to begin with. I was on CQ one night, and the Huey had come in from Zeon, Supply Huey. We were in Quanloy. And they brought a new guide-on to the troop. Our old guide-on had been damaged, and it had been damaged. And I was told that we were going to burn the old guide-on. Well, then I did steal it. I'm a history nut, and I knew what flags meant to military units, and this was our guide-on, and just because it was messed up a little bit, I couldn't stand the thought of them burning the guide-on.
The original.
This is the original guide-on that you brought from Fort Knox, Kentucky. I verified that while I was still over there. But I didn't stick it in my pocket or anything. I just took it to my hooch and I hung it above my bunk. And I stayed there from Quanloy to Lackay, and then I transferred to the 101st. I took it to Fubai, and nobody up there ever realized it was 3rd of the 17th instead of 2nd of the 17th. and then I carried it home and I put it in the cedar chest. And since then, I've lost all my photo albums. I've lost my uniforms. I lost my boonie hat. My original Cav hat was stolen. The only thing I had left was this guidon. And a couple of months ago, I pulled it out of the cedar chest and was trying to figure out what am I going to do with this guidon. I don't want anything bad to happen to it. I don't know of a museum that wants it. And I mentioned to Bear that I had the original guidon. He suggested that it go to you. And I heartily agree. And it is my pleasure to give you this guidon. And these stains, for you guys who were there, this is Quanloy mud. The original mud from Quanloy. We had a storm and this guidon fell into the mud and stayed there overnight. That was somebody else's screw up. I'm not the one that didn't carry it back inside. But that's how it got damaged, and this is the same condition that it was in Quanloy. And it is the original.
Is that wild or what?
That is fabulous.
That is unbelievable, isn't it? It came home to you.
You know, as most of you know, I did not make a career of the Army. And there were a lot of others of you that didn't, but I think by and large, I think most of you here probably did. But I did come to realize that the Army, you know, is a huge organization. And I can't imagine how many people, men and women, have been through and served since I did. But in some other respects, I found out that really, you know, we're in somewhat of a pretty small world. I went to Fort Knox in May of 1967 as an ROTC grad, and to go through the Armor Officer Basic Course. And it just so happened that I think about a month later, a young kid who just had graduated from high school a year before with Bill Clinton in Hot Springs, Arkansas, showed up there to begin for his induction, and basically then later when he went into the OCS school there at Fort Knox. We both got our first rides in OH-6s while we were there at Fort Knox. I had, when I finished the Armor Officer Basic Course, I think I had about a month to go before I was supposed to report to Mineral Wells. And so they TDY'd me, I think to the, I don't know, the 7th to 17th or the 7th to the 1st that was forming up there. And a couple of us served as the aggressor force for their training that they were doing along with you all. I remember they were using, I think, the Green River Valley. I thought it was named something like that because the government had condemned it because they were going to build a dam, and so they had this huge valley with farmhouses, and you know, people just had moved out and were gone. And so that's where we played for a month before I headed to flight school. But again, talking about how small a world it is, on that fateful day in May of 1967 at the firepower demonstration, I was sitting in those grandstands along with, I know Nathan Pulliam and Chuck Wallene, and probably a lot of others were probably there. Claude Whittle was there. And that was quite an impact on a young lieutenant who was getting ready to leave to go to flight school. But I didn't learn until recently, how really small a world it really was. When I got out of flight school in July of '68 and came over to Vietnam in August, Hugh Mills was 4 months behind me. I had, in talking with the troopers, the soldiers that were manning the 90th replacement detachment, about what the aviation units were around there, because I didn't have orders past there. We were waiting for orders, and they talked about them, and they just said one thing pretty consistently. He said, "But you don't want to go to the CAV. These guys get shot at a lot, and you just hope you don't get sent there." I did, and Hugh Mills was a little different because he got there and he wanted to go to the CAV. Maybe he can explain that to you. But I left Long Bend to go to Zion, and I was a little terrified because we were riding in a Jeep, and this was a war zone, and I didn't quite understand that. But I remember reporting into Major Jenks' office that evening, and as I remember it, the first words out of his mouth were, "Can you fly a Cobra?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, you're a scout then. And let me tell you what I'm looking for." We stayed in Zion, as you know, and we talked about this morning. We were in Long Bend until mid-December or late December when we moved to Zion, just before Christmas. I think my logbook shows the first flight that I departed Zion on a mission was December 24th. 2 weeks later, Hugh Mills showed up at Zion to process through on his way to Fuloy as part of D Troop, the air cav troop of the Quarter Cav. It was part of the 1st Infantry Division. And he went up there and became part of what is known as a call sign of Dark Horse. Was a lift pilot for a couple of months, and then took over the scout platoon as Dark Horse 16. Some of you have read his book. If you haven't, you've missed something. At the end of his year, this young man from Hot Springs, Arkansas, had accumulated 3 Silver Stars, 4 DFCs, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Bronze Star with a V for Valor for ground operations. And many of you aviators may ask, how does a helicopter pilot get that? Well, if you are dumb enough to land your loach and get out and chase down an NVA major who was armed, capture him, and take him back in for questioning, you can maybe you can get you one of those. But it's with a great deal of pleasure that I introduce you to Dark Horse 16, Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Mills.
You don't ever skewer a guy who's about to take the microphone. John didn't tell you that I'm a I'm the colonel of the sheriff's office in Kansas City these days, and I deal with lawyers on a daily basis. He's one of the rare ones that I like. It's great to be here. I am pleased. When John first called me, I was a little tentative, and to be candid with you, it's tough as an outsider to come to another unit's reunion. This is a little daunting. But the more we talked, the first thing we found out is that both of us are brothers in Sigma Chi. When you realize that, I had no obligation other than to say yes. And then I got to checking, and in your ranks are included two of my oldest, dearest friends. Bruce Osborne, who shared OCS billets with me in Company E1, Fort Knox, Kentucky. And Bob Scurzy, sitting right over there, who was one of the bastard senior officers that came and bothered me. As a junior candidate, they would descend on us on a nightly basis once the tax went home, and they had their way with us for almost 4 months. Bob and I would go off together to flight school, where thankfully he sat by me, and that's the approximate reason he graduated from flight school. And it was again in 1972 that Bob and I joined paths again at the Armor Officers Advanced Course at Fort Knox, and he sought very, very hard to sit by me again, but unfortunately was in another section. But it's great. I haven't seen Bob since Fort Knox. It's been that long. He does not look one bit different. That's the best genes in this room. Very quickly, I'd like to introduce my wife for those who have not met her. Sharon, sitting over here at the head table. Stand up. We celebrated 38 years of marriage last week.
Whoa.
I'm pleased to tell you that because the statute of limitations on marrying an 11-year-old has passed.
I got him, buddy.
And she told me to say that. It's a great honor to be here because, frankly, I followed in the footsteps of men like Nathan Pulliam and John Jinks. Service in the 17th Cavalry myself, in the Heavy Cav at Fort Hood, the ACCB, the Air Cav Combat Brigade, in command of air troops in my own right. And to follow in the footsteps of men whose names you've heard. Billy Miller in the back is a legend in the Special Operations community. It's really a daunting task to come in here as an outsider and talk to you, but the more I thought about it, our paths, as John said, were strikingly similar. I joined the Army in 1967 for validation with the enlisted troops. I was an enlisted soldier. I was an 11 B-10 infantryman. I came in on the airborne option, and following that, I was selected for OCS, and I was tempted not to go to OCS, and I called my father, who was a veteran of World War II, and I said, "Dad, do I really want to do this OCS thing?" And he said, "You will go to OCS or I will kick your ass all the way." And so I did what I've done for 64 years. I did exactly what my father told me to do. John mentioned, and I'll just say very quickly that yes, I went to school with Bill Clinton. Bill and I were classmates. Bill graduated in '64. I graduated in '66. He is not from Hope. That's hype. He is from Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he lived from the age of 3. And just a quick vignette, Bill was at Independence, Missouri 2 years ago in the Truman Library, and he was giving a speech, and after the speech he came down to work the crowd, and I was actually in the office of the Truman Library in the command center with the head of his Secret Service detail. And in the middle of that, I was talking to the senior Secret Service guy, and they're watching him on all these cameras that go wherever he goes. And the agent on the camera said he stopped. He was working the crowd line after the speech. He said he stopped. He's talking to a woman. And I turned around just to see who it was, and it was Sharon on the screen. She had held up a picture. My dad was superintendent of schools when Bill went through school. And she yelled out, "Mr. President, I'm Hugh Mills's, my father, I'm a junior. I'm Hugh Mills's daughter-in-law." And Bill stopped and said, "I love that guy," and started telling her jokes. And finally, I had to tell the Secret Service agent, "I'm sorry, that's my wife that he's talking to." As John said, I came to Vietnam with Bob on the 1st of January 1969. I had gone to flight school at Fort Walters, Texas, Mineral Wells, as all of you did. I went on to Fort Rucker. I actually took a short sojourn through the B model track. For some reason, some of us got qualified in B model gunships. I flew A models, B models, B model gunships, and then came to Vietnam in that fashion. And when I arrived at the 90th Replacement Battalion, I informed the assignment officer that I was a cavalry officer by God, and I was here to serve with the 1st of the 9th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division. Thank you very much. Where are my orders? And he looked at me and he said, "We'll get back to you." A number of guys shipped out that afternoon for the 1st Cavalry Division. I was still in the 90th Repo. The next day I came in, I said, "You got no more billets in the 1st of the 9th? He said, "Nope." I said, "All right, I would be glad to go to the Air Troop 11th Armored Cav Regiment Black Horse. I'm here to fly scouts for them. Where are my orders?" And they said, "We'll get back to you." 3 days later, they walked in and said, "Mills, your orders are here. You're going to the 1st Infantry Division." I said, "What the heck? Why is a cavalry aviator going to the 1st Infantry Division?" And they said, "We don't know. We'll get back to you." That afternoon, a laundry truck showed up at the 90th Repo, and I was told to get in the back with the laundry going to Zion. And that is how I arrived in the 1st Infantry Division's rear area at Zion, in the squadron headquarters of the Quarter Cav, also at Zion, in the back of a laundry truck coming from Saigon. I was further assigned to Phu Loy. The 1st Aviation Battalion's aviation base was at Phu Loy, and the air troop was there, attached for logistical purposes to the 1st Aviation Battalion, because the Quarter Cav, a ground cavalry unit of 3 armored cav troops, could not logistically support an air troop. Different fuel, logistical tail, and all that. So we belonged to the 1st Aviation Battalion for logistical support. So I arrived there and met with the battalion commander, and he looked at me and he said, "Mills, you're a cav guy. You're going to the air troop." I said, "Thank God, finally I might have an idea of where I'm going." So I went across the Dark Horse, 1st to the 4th Cav, and I arrived with the troop commander, Willie Cummings. And I said, "Sir, I'm here. I want to fly scouts." He said, "I don't have any room in scouts. We're going to put you in slicks, and we'll see how it goes. More or less, I'll get back to you." So for 2 months, I was assigned to the scout platoon. Wayne McAdoo was the scout, or the lift platoon leader, rather. And having just gotten to country and just taken my in-country check ride, Wayne announced that he was leaving for R&R. And he was married. He was going to Hawaii to see his wife. "Thanks for being here, Lieutenant." 20-year-old 1st Lieutenant. "Thanks for being here. You're now in command of the lift platoon of Dark Horse. I'm going to Hawaii," and off he goes. Well, I'm smart enough to know that in that circumstance, what you do is find the senior warrant officer pilot in the unit and say, "Come here, you're riding with me," or more accurately, "I'm riding with you." Within 3 days, we had a mission to launch the Blues, we call them ARCs, to launch our air mobile infantry to rescue alert team that was trapped in the Catcher's Mid area along the Saigon River. I had never flown a combat assault in my life, and part of that required the adjustment of artillery, both 105 and 155, to prep the landing zone. And so I told Bob Holmes, this lucky warrant officer 1, the senior warrant I had in the troop, "You fly the airplane, I'll shoot the artillery." He said, "Good plan, because I have no idea how to shoot artillery." So off we go, we make this grandiose plan, and the agreed upon last round in the LZ was to be Willie Pete. We hit the RP, we turned inbound to the LZ, I looked up, I could see the LZ at about 800 yards. We'd go from echelon right to trail. We tell the guns they got to hold tight, the gunners on the aircraft, because we got LRPs off to our right. We're inserting almost right on top of them into a hot LZ. And here's the artillery, and it's just pounding that LZ, black smoke billowing up. And now we're at 700 yards. And Bob's looking at me, and I got my head down on a map, and I'm talking to Like Artie, and keep it coming, and now we're 600 yards, and 500 yards, and 400 yards, and he starts to throttle back, and we're going back to 60 knots. And I'm beginning to get worried because all that impact in the LZ is still black smoke, which means high explosive. And now we're at 300 yards, and Bob Holmes looks at me, and as he does, a white phosphorus round billows in the LZ, and all fire is cut off. We land our arcs, under fire, off we go. And as we're leaving the LZ, he said, "LT, that was a great job of artillery. How many times you done that?" And I looked at Bob, I said, "Once." And that was the only time in my career in Vietnam that I ever adjusted artillery, because I never would again as a scout pilot. In March of 1969, our scout platoon leader, John Herkert, was very, very grievously wounded and chose not to fly scouts anymore after his return from convalescence. Willie Cummings came to me and said, "Do you want to fly scouts?" I said, "Yes, I want to fly scouts." And so that began my career as Dark Horse 16. Now the area that we flew in was very, very similar to the area you flew in. It was auspiciously noted on your unit map as the blank spot in the upper right-hand corner of that map right there. We were based just north of Zion. The eastern flank of our AO was the Iron Triangle. The northern flank was the Fishhook, the Parrots Beak of Cambodia. The Michelin Rubber Plantation, Dao Tiang, Song Bay, Loc Ninh, An Loc, and Quan Loy. So all the areas that you guys flew that were there in the 70s is the area that I flew in 1969. We were under the operational control of the division's G2. And so it was the G2 that gave us our mission every day. And we would fly out with 2 recon teams a day and 2 scramble teams. And we were organized with 1 Cobra, 1 Scout as what we called a hunter-killer team, or a pink team. 2 of those would launch off about 5:30 in the morning and recon the area, and then when we found something, we'd launch a scramble team who would come up, relieve us on station, and continue to develop the situation until we were able to put in our ARPs on the ground. Now, we used our ARPs a lot. I was looking at your Hall of Honor and looking at mine in the same regard. We lost 82 Dark Horse troopers during the time I was there in Vietnam. Most of them were ARPs. 22 ARPs were killed, 42 ARPs were killed, 27 scouts were killed during my 2 tours with Dark Horse. So the ARPs took a far greater burden, twice being annihilated on the ground as an effective fighting force, once in the Razorbacks, when the 1st Division's 3rd Brigade commander inserted a 28-man rifle platoon to block the retreat of an NVA regiment. And they were literally obliterated. The only 4 survivors that were in fighting shape was the platoon leader, the RTO, and the FTO, and 1 rifleman. They were run over by a 300-man NVA regiment. In the time I was there, we went through 5 aero rifle platoon leaders, 5 lieutenants in the course of 12 months. We lost a lieutenant about every 3 months in the Blues. The scouts took the next greatest hit. 27 of my scouts fell in 2 tours as the Dark Horse 16. We never lost a gunship pilot in 1969. I was very pleased to find out the other night, I had always labored under the impression that the world's greatest Cobra pilot was in fact in Dark Horse, because Chuck Coranda has told me that since 1969, and I find out at the hockey game here in town, it was actually Claude Whittle. Who told me that no, he was in fact the world's greatest quarterback. So I was glad to clear that up. At the end of that particular tour, and I'll not bore you with all the details, I left in December 1969 and elected to go to Europe unassigned to attempt to command a tank company. Because as a young cavalry officer who at that time did not have a college degree, and I was 21 years old, it seemed to me that the best thing to do was get my creds validated on the ground and not continue flying at least for a year or so. Remember, guys, we all predate the aviation branch. I went to Germany. I came home in June of that year. I married my high school sweetheart. Took her back to Germany in 7 months. She was dead of ovarian cancer. And so we were sent back to Fort Sam Houston for her medical care, which did not, thankfully, take long. But I called Branch and said, I'd like to go back to Vietnam. And that was not a time when a lot of guys were calling Armor Branch and wanting to go back. I'd just been home a year and a half. And so Branch said, okay, would you like a school? I said, well, yeah, send me to Cobra School. So off I go with orders to Savannah, Georgia to go to Hunter Army Airfield to go to Cobra School. And I showed up there in April, and I walk into the room at Cobra Hall, and there sit 3 other officers. Larry Massman, a captain, Bob Hartley, a W-2, and Ken Shriver, a W-2. Some of you may know Ken Shriver's name. He was one of the first officers killed in an Apache crash in Louisiana. But those guys were my Cobra transition class, and I thought, gosh darn, this is a pretty small class. The war can't be that close to an end. So we all met each other and walked out to the line to look at a G model, and the instructor pilot pointed to the device on the airplane, said, Mr. Hartley, what's that? He said, that's a 42-degree gearbox. Good job. Captain Massman, what's this over here? Well, that's the igniter exciter on the engine. That's a good job. Mr. Shriver, what are these on this unpaneled aircraft? Well, those are the intervalometers. Good job. Captain Mills, what's that right there? I said, Chief, it looks like a vent. Well, after about 4 of these, Captain Mills, what is that? Followed by an answer of, I hadn't got a damn clue. The one officer looked at me and he said, well, Captain, how many hours you got in the Cobra? I said, I don't have any hours in the Cobra. He said, well, this is the Cobra instructor pilot's course. Immediately there was much gnashing of teeth because here I was in the Cobra instructor pilot's course. I was not qualified in the aircraft, but I was an SIP in the OH-6. So they ran back and put their heads together and they called DES, Bob's old outfit, and they finally came to the conclusion that I could stay, but in the morning when they were doing MOI, I had to do basic transition. And in the afternoon when they were doing gunnery, I had to do MOI. So my sojourn in Cobra School was to spend all morning learning how to fly a maneuver, and that afternoon I had to teach that same maneuver back to my instructor pilot. So at the end of the course, they graduated, and I had to stay and do a week of gunnery totally by myself.